Okay, we'll get started. Welcome everybody to the Urban Tree Festival and this first in the series of Tree Rings webinars curated by the Woodland Trust. My name's Sarah Shawley and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the Urban Tree Festival as well as the Woodland Trust, where I work in campaigning for urban woods and trees. Today's webinar, Urban Trees, Wellbeing on Your Doorstep, is facilitated by Students for Trees, and I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. We've got Hazel Mooney, who is Chair of Students for Trees and a PhD researcher working in the School of Earth and Environment. Becky Lyon is an artist currently studying MA Art and Ecology at Goldsmiths University. And Vicky Entwistle is Volunteer Development Officer at the Woodland Trust for the North of England. Vicky has worked with Bolton GP Federation to develop a green social prescribing programme of walks at the Woodland Trust's biggest site in England, Smith Hills. Please note that the webinar is being recorded. Thank you all for attending this event. Please do pop any questions you have in the Q&A and we'll look forward to answering those later on in the webinar. We hope you enjoy it and that you might consider making a donation to the festival and looking out for future webinars later in the week. But we'll now get started. I'll hand over to Hazel.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll just share my screen. Great, so thank you everyone for joining us today and taking the time out of your day. Our session today is all focused around the wellbeing benefits that we can get from spending time around urban trees. And just a quick introduction from Students for Trees, who are chairing this event. So Students for Trees is, oh, 1 second. My screen hasn't moved. Has it moved now? Good, sorry. So Students for Trees are going to be chairing this event, and then we've got some speakers, as Sarah mentioned, and time for Q&A at the end. So Students for Trees, who are we? So Students for Trees is a national initiative supported by the Woodland Trust and SOS UK, which is the sort of sustainability arm of NUS. And it's about mobilising students to take a journey in taking action for trees and engaging with trees, learning about how to identify trees, protecting them, planting them, and sharing that passion with others. And we provide an opportunity for students across the UK to access trees, for hosting their own planting events, and to connect with local councils and other community groups that are doing fantastic things for trees as well. And the reason that Students for Trees is chairing this event today is that we recognise that during Urban Tree Festival, it's also exam season, and lots of students will be very much bogged down with their revision or in an exam at some point this week. And we thought that it was a brilliant opportunity to draw upon those fantastic benefits that trees can provide for our mental health. And hopefully some students are here today taking a break from their busy schedules. If you want to know a little bit more about Students for Trees, I can pop a link to our email in the chat, and you can find out more about signing up to Students for Trees and joining us as a branch or as an individual, so that you can get involved in taking action with other students for trees. So the main premise behind our session today is hoping that we all recognise the benefits that urban green spaces can provide to us. But Vicky and Becky are going to explore some of the ways in which we can better connect with them and spend time in urban green spaces in a quality way that's going to really benefit us. And this is really important because we know that lots of people are living in urban areas, and there's now 84% of the UK population in urban areas. So accessing and being able to benefit from urban green spaces is really important. I would say that it's important to recognise that not everybody has equal benefits, and that's definitely something that we must remember, that some people find it very difficult to access green space, and hopefully that's something that will improve with time as more green spaces and woodlands are planted and things like this. And another point is that COVID-19 pandemic really highlighted how important nature was to people, and that ability to escape to green spaces where possible. And even if it was just a small patch of grass nearby or the plants on your balcony, even just the smallest things can really make a difference. And hopefully we're going to look at some of those things today. And then we also champion urban green space because it can really help us to build resilience to other environmental hazards as well. And that kind of all feeds into how we're feeling and experiencing our environment as well. So just a few kind of background things on why we want to talk about urban trees today. So we're going to come back to a Q&A session at the end, and I'm now going to hand over to, is it Vicky next?
I think it is. Oh, we'll go with that anyway. So just let me try to share my screen. So can everyone see that okay? Yeah. So just a quick introduction to who I am and why I'm here talking to you about this today. So I am currently the Volunteer Development Officer for the North of England for the Woodland Trust, which is a role I've only been in for a few months. Prior to that, I was a Community Engagement Officer for the Woodland Trust at our biggest site in England, which is Smithills Estate. And that's also an urban fringe site. So it's right on the outskirts of the biggest town in England, and was in an easy reach of 250,000 people. So part of my role was to help people to access that space. And some of that included using it to improve well-being. On top of that, I'm also a trained counsellor, which is something I do when I'm not working for the Woodland Trust. And I've become interested during the time I've been training and practicing counselling in the way that nature seems to help people. And it's something that people tell me as well as me telling them. So it's a reciprocal learning thing for me on that front. Personally, I have struggled with anxiety and depression for my whole adult life. And although there's lots of things that help people in different ways, exercise and other kinds of things, nature is a thing that's really helped me when things have been difficult. So I can tell you that some of the things we're going to talk about today, I know that they can work, although it's not, everybody's different, but it's not something, I'm not telling you things that I haven't experienced myself. So moving on from that, what can nature help us with? So I want to be clear here that what we're talking about is the kind of mood changes that we can all experience from time to time, living busy lives and things that happen. I'm not talking about clinical issues, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But what being in nature can help you with is low mood. And what I mean by that is periods of time where you might feel that you're slightly withdrawing from your friends or people close to you, or you're finding that you've got a lack of interest in things that would usually have interested you. You might be very tired or having sleep issues, and you might feel a change in your confidence levels. Can also help with worry and anxiety, and by that I mean you might experience, and particularly during exam season, you might experience levels of worry that are higher than normal, that you feel that you can't stop thinking about certain things. We call that rumination. You might feel overwhelmed, or that you can't switch off from things which are worrying you. You might be preoccupied with certain things and not find a way to take your brain to a place where you're not experiencing that. And racing thoughts, and by that I mean, and I think we've all experienced this from time to time, we might catastrophize about things. We might be in a situation where we're experiencing something and we're expecting the worst case scenario. We're not thinking 100% rationally about it. And again, very, very common in exam time to think this is never going to work. I'm never going to pass. I'm never going to get through this. So that, focusing on one issue at the expense of everything else. And perspective, nature can be really good at giving us a sense of perspective. So allowing us to take the focus off those things which are preoccupying us, take us out of that situation that we've found ourselves slightly bogged down in, giving you a break from that feeling of overwhelming worry and being somewhere completely different. But what I will say is, if you find that these kinds of feelings are not transient and they've been there for maybe 2 weeks or more and they're impacting on your life, that's the point at which you need to go. Maybe talk to your GP and just mention that and see what they suggest. They might well suggest a green prescription, we don't know, but I would say if it's something that's persistent and not something that's just happening for a few days, then maybe go and chat to your GP. So going back to what I was saying about the work we did at Smithills Estate, part of what we did there was to create a series of walks for different groups and communities who lived in Bolton. And a lot of that tended to be around improving well-being for people. And what I want to emphasize at this point is that the techniques we used on these walks were always similar. So we weren't designing completely different walks for completely different groups. There might have been some route changes or things we needed to consider for people with different accessibility issues, but the techniques around connecting with nature are always the same. So the kind of things that we did were dementia-friendly walks, where we take people out who maybe used to love being in nature, but had found that they couldn't get there anymore, and sort of making that accessible again for them. We did walks for people who were carers, and that was respite, a chance to meet other people and to go somewhere different. We did walks with care home residents, and then in the last year or so, we began to run social prescribing walks, which were run by the local GP Federation. So the people who came to those walks had been referred to us by the NHS. And that was specifically designed around anxiety, but also proved effective for low mood and isolation as well. And we found that when we chatted to people about these walks and the benefits of that, and we did do a lot of evaluation on that, one thing that one participant said that really struck me, we did an exercise where we had to describe one thing in nature that gave you hope. And the participant said this group and being with these people. And I thought, we've done something okay here, haven't we? Because if we are the hope, then brilliant. It's allowed people to return to previous passions that they had. It's allowed people to find a new interest. So some people have really got into knowing what's around them and learning about nature, and that's given them another thing to focus on, which has been brilliant. And it's given people that respite from the challenges of everyday life. And that might be a busy family, it might be a busy job, it might be university. But just that time to give yourself that time away from that and doing something that makes your mood lift. And we all say, don't we, we haven't got time, we're too busy. But it's really important to put that time in your calendar. And that's one of the biggest things you can do for your own well-being. So some important points about using nature to improve your well-being. First of all, it's not about knowing everything. So if you go for a walk anywhere, sometimes we can feel that we don't know enough to engage with nature. Like, we don't know what that tree is, we don't know what that plant is, we don't know what that bird is that's singing. And we think that people who do know all of this stuff are kind of like amazing wizards, and where have they learned this from? It doesn't matter that you don't know that stuff. The point is to start noticing that these things are there, and maybe noticing the difference between different species that you see. And it will all come over time, that knowledge. You might not even be that bothered about learning what the species are, and it doesn't matter. Like, or it might also spark an interest where you want to learn about that. And if you do, then there are apps on your phone that can really help you if you're just on a walk around the block, that you can use an app called Seek, which I find really useful, where you just hold your camera over a leaf or a flower. It will tell you what that is. And that can help you to sort of connect with where you are and learn about the plants and the trees that exist in your local vicinity. And I think this is something that Hazel was touching on, is that it's not the same for everyone in terms of access to green spaces. And I was very conscious when thinking about this seminar that I didn't want to take you all to a virtual green space that I'd been to that was full of this amazing stuff that you will not get in a town centre. So I focused it on Bolton Town Centre, which is like most other town centres, it's very built up. But I'll show you shortly how much you can find even in a space like that. So it's not impossible wherever you are to get out and find a few things that are new, interesting, that spark your interest and take your mind away from all those worries that we have every day. Everyone is different. So much like when we get told that exercise is good for you and everyone prefers something slightly different, you might want to engage with nature in different ways. Some people, trees will be the thing. And obviously for most of us here, that is what's brought us here today. But it can also be birdsong or wildlife or wildflowers, or even gardening and creating your own space with you choosing the plants. And that's all absolutely fine. And like I said before, if you're finding that stress, worry, depression are impacting you every day, then do have a chat with someone about that. So I'm going to run through a couple of different techniques that are really simple that anyone can do wherever you are. And that can be helpful in just dialing down a bit of that anxiety or low mood that you might be experiencing. And the first technique is around focusing on what's around you. So I don't know whether people want to have a quick type in the chat. I don't know how quickly we can get those answers up, but if you walk, say, from your house to your work, or from the tube station, the train station, or to college or university, or just to get some lunch, what kind of things normally catch our eye on that walk? And that might be, depending on where you are. Well, I don't want to preempt what people are going to say. So if anyone's got anything in the chat box, what they usually notice on their daily walk, let's have a see what people think. Sky and the clouds, Becky. Bird song. Yes, the sky is always there, Becky, isn't it? You can't get away from it. And that's something that we can all pay attention to and see how the clouds, especially how they change with the weather. Bird song, again, it's something that I notice all of the time now, even through the changing seasons, and particularly at the moment, if you happen to be up at 5 a.m, and we won't ask why, but the dawn chorus is absolutely astonishing. Wildflowers growing out of concrete or brick. It's been a particular thing of mine at the moment. I'm slightly obsessed with noticing what's growing out of cracks in the ground. Flower stages in part of the neighborhood, and tree, and what's growing in people's gardens. Yes, what is that plant that they've got and how do I get one? The canopy of the street trees. This is amazing. So you're all there already noticing what's around you and switching your attention to not necessarily the road, the cars, the noise, the people, and all of the things that are designed to try and pull our attention away from that. The shop windows, the newspaper adverts, all of that is taking us away from that green environment that we know is there. So this rather dull looking map is the walk I chose to do for this session. And that is from, you can see at the bottom, what's called the Jason Kenny Centre in Bolton, which is just on the edge of the university. All the way through town, past the shopping centres and the supermarkets and the car parks, to the car park on the other side of town where I parked. And my task for that was it's 1 mile walk, so 20 minutes. My task for that was to see how many types of tree I could find on that walk. So that gave me something to focus on. So that's where we're thinking about taking that focus from whatever it is that's on your mind that might be difficult to shift, getting yourself out there and thinking, I'm going to do this thing now and I'm going to start to notice. But how am I going to know what those different trees are if I'm not a tree expert? And that's, so what we're going to do is look at the leaves. Even if you don't know what the species is, the shape of the leaf can help you to do that. So I'm going to take you on a little whistle-stop tour of Bolton now. And on the way, we're going to look at the trees that I found. And some of the photos are from Google Maps, and that is just to show you what the environment is like in that area, because all my photos of the beautiful trees don't really show you where the trees were. So the first stop on my walk was Senate House, which is at the bottom of the campus of the University of Bolton. And in that area is, there's a landscaped area at the front, which has got some really beautiful Japanese and beach roses. And I found that out using Seek. So someone might want to tell me that that's an incorrect idea, but I think it's correct. And they're absolutely lovely. And there's some other flowering plants there with seating around it. And people are using that as a place to stop and chat. And that obviously shows the importance of creating those spaces as areas for people to sort of chill out a little bit. But if you take a step back and you look at the bottom photo, you can see that's the view that I had of Senate House. There are a couple of trees there that are quite interesting. So the first, on the right-hand side, you can see the birch trees, which are the tall ones that are blowing in the wind. The birch tree you will see in a lot of places. It's a really quick growing tree. It's often a pioneer species, so it'll be the first to appear in a woodland. And it makes a beautiful noise in the wind as well. It's very rustly. It's got a beautiful bark that you can sort of look at. It's sort of silvery textured horizontal stripes. So birch tree is pretty common. But if you look on the left-hand side of that, you can see a bigger tree there. And that's a London plane tree. Now, London planes are the most common tree in London. They are, however, not a native tree. They were hybridized and brought here in the Industrial Revolution. Now, I don't know, and someone may know more than me about this. They are more pollution resistant than other trees. And some people have made the connection that that is why they were planted in the Industrial Revolution. I'm not 100% certain about how much people knew about that connection at that point, but it seems to have been a good thing to have done. But they are incredibly tall and big trees, and you can see here completely different leaf shape to the birch tree. So we can know, even if we don't know what these species are, we can know that they are two different things. The picture on the right is that tree there, and I took that photo on my walk, and you can see how wonderfully gnarly it is now, covered in lichen and moss and even ferns up here. Now that's a sign of a temperate climate, which Bolton certainly is. It's very wet a lot of the time, and you'll find a lot of the trees have got these ferns part way up. So that there was a really impressive tree, just sitting on the grass outside the university, like really far away from where everyone else was congregating. But I spent ages just looking here for different kinds of species on that tree. So that's 2 trees already. Then I walked around the corner to the Mecca Bingo Hall, and I used to walk past this every single evening after college, and listening to the bingo calling, which you could hear in the car park. But I'd never noticed this tree opposite. So I went over to have a little look at it, and it was just about in flower now, and it's a white beam tree. So it's just on the edge of some flats, in the grounds of the flats, but right next to the car park for the bingo hall. So the white beam tree you will not really see very often in woodlands, but pretty common as an ornamental in parks and as an urban tree. And you can see why, because it's really, really pretty and beautiful. It's a hermaphrodite tree, so it has both male and female parts, so you'll get flowers and the fruit throughout the year, and the fruit are called chess apples, which is something, I don't know where that name comes from, but the fascinating fact for me about that was that apparently people eat them when they're just about to rot. Now, I'm not sure whether the flavour gets better as they're just about to rot, and I'm not going to suggest that you do that because it sounds pretty horrible, but that was a fact that I found about white beam trees. So these trees can grow to about 15 metres tall, and they can live for around 80 years. And like I say, they're incredibly pretty at this time of year. So if you do see any, stop and have a look at the blooms on them. As a wood, they've been used in the past as cogwheels for machinery, so quite a sturdy and hardy wood. And the leaf you can see is a sort of it's almost a beachy shape, but again, different from the 2 that we've seen before. And then opposite this on Ormrod Street, which is just heading from Mecca Bingo to Morrison's, there were 2 types of maple tree. So the one on the top left, which I think is a Norway maple, is a completely different colour to the field maple, which was on the other side of the road. So the Norway maple is part of the family of acers, which we might have in our garden as an ornamental, and we know that they can be spectacular colours, particularly in the autumn. But this one is a spectacular colour even in the spring. It's a gorgeous sort of deep reddy brown colour. You see these, they're quite common in parks again, so this might be something that is familiar where you are, but you wouldn't necessarily see them in woodlands. They obviously make maple syrup, and their wood can be used for furniture, and they can live for around 150 years and grow to around 60 feet tall. So a big tree in the urban environment. The field maple is a smaller tree, and that is the tree at the bottom. And the leaves are a slightly different shape. You can see on the left-hand side, they're more rounded, the edges, whereas the Norway maple is a sharper leaf. The field maple is native. It's our only native maple tree. And it can live a lot longer than the Norway maple, around 400 years. And its wood has been used for musical instruments. And I found this a lovely fact, in particular harps. So now I will think of that when I walk past the field maple, that its wood can make such lovely music. So these 2 are on opposite sides of the road, and that made me think about the different reasons that they might have been planted there, and the difference between those 2 species, and one being native and one being non-native, just the contrast in all those different ways. So then I crossed over the road and went to Morrison's car park, and along the edge of Morrison's car park, you can see a row of rowan trees, which are just about in flower now. So the rowan tree has a lot of mythology around it, including the fact that it saved Thor in the underworld when it bent over a river and allowed him to cross. It's also regular. You'll find it if you're walking in landscapes that used to be farmers' fields and things like that. You will find rowan trees that are maybe 100 or so years old that might have been planted on the edge of their farmland. And that would be to protect them from evil spirits. That goes way, way, way hundreds of years back, often planted in Welsh graveyards as well for similar reasons, to protect people against witches. Rowans are they're a smaller tree. So even when you get really, really old rowan trees, they won't be huge. They get to a maximum of about 15 meters and can live for around 200 years. So they'll be classed as ancient much sooner than some other species of tree. But you get them commonly, you'll see them probably on a walk, and they're easier to identify this time of year when the flowers are out, and in autumn when the berries are out. Used to make tool handles. So again, that kind of links to this protective thing. But they were all along the edge of this car park in Morrison's, with nobody really noticing them. And I hadn't noticed them the millions of times I've been in there for a sandwich. So it was really nice to stop and appreciate that as I was walking along that pavement there. Over the road from Morrison's is the entrance to a huge NCP car park. And outside of there was an elder tree. They can look similar if you're at a distance to the rowan tree, because it's got similar coloured flowers, but they are distinct when you get up close. The flowers are very different. So the elder tree is flowering now in some parts of the UK. The ones right near me, but I'm higher up in the moors, are not flowering yet, but they might be where you are. And it's the flowers that make Elderflower Cordial, which is delicious. And there's recipes for that on the Woodland Trust website, and I've done that myself, and it's great. They grow in a variety of soil, including poor soil, which again probably contributes to how good they are in an urban environment. You can see this one here is along a hedgerow almost. And they also have a lot of mythology associated with them, some of which I find really fascinating. So it used to be said not to burn the wood of an elder tree because it would conjure the devil. So be careful of using it in your fire if you have one. And it was also, for those of you who grew up reading Harry Potter, the Elder Wand was the most powerful wand of them all, which could only be used by someone who had come to terms with death. So a lot of mythology, sort of like macabre mythology around the elder tree, but in fact, really beautiful, lots of uses for us, including dyes for clothes, as well as Elderflower Cordial, and can live around 60 years. So if you've got one near you, keep popping along, seeing when the flowers are coming, and see if you can take advantage of those recipes. This is a town hall square in Bolton. So this is an example of urban planning, including trees, which you'll see in most town centres. There'll be a place where there's been some formal planning like this. And these again are London plane trees. They've got to a really good height, and there's benches amongst all of this so people can stop. Some of the benches are actually around the trees. I think you can see on one of the photos there. So people can stop under the shade of the tree. Just take a minute to appreciate the pattern of the leaves and the branches above you, which is the bottom picture there, and just the shade that it provides. So the next stop is the Marketplace Shopping Centre, and that's the Market Hall itself is very, very old, but the Marketplace Shopping Centre is quite new. And I think some of the trees on the outside have probably been added when the centre was renovated. But there's an avenue of lime trees along there, which provide some shade and greenery. Lime trees, again, there's a lot of them where I am, and I've seen a lot of them in parks and on streets, and they can get very, very tall, and they can often have at the bottom of them lots of shoots coming up, which looks like the tree is very stressed, but it's not that. That's kind of normal for lime trees, but it's one of the ways that you can tell that you've got a lime tree there. They're a good food source for lots and lots of different types of moth, including lime hawk moths. So they're really good for biodiversity. And their mythology is all around romance and fertility. So they have been linked with that since ancient Egyptian times, when masks were found near the sarcophagi in tombs made of lime or linden tree. And timber in Egypt was a really rare commodity, so it shows like the importance of that even back then. They can grow around 40 meters, and they can live a lot longer than some of the other trees we've seen on this, so maybe up to 700 years. And in the bottom two pictures you can see there's a lot of moss and lichen on these trees as well. And that is a really good sign, considering that they're on a main road there, that the air quality is actually not too bad, because you'll get much more moss and lichen in areas where the pollution is low. So looking at the leaves there, they're often quite difficult to tell apart from some other species like hazel. But again, if you're unsure, have a go using Seek or iNaturalist and see what it says. Take a picture, maybe share it on a Facebook group for Tree ID and see if someone comes back to you about that. And, oh, gone too far. So the 10th stop was actually a site that's about to be demolished and has been cleared. And it's an old theatre workshop and glass works. And this tree is just sitting there amongst this kind of like tarmacked area that's waiting to be completely bulldozed on its own. And it's a sycamore tree. It's actually got a chain around it, and I'm not entirely sure why, but maybe it was used for people who had bikes or something when this area was busy. So the sycamore tree is a really common tree, which you probably will have seen where you live. You can get them in lots of parks. It's used along roads and other walkways that you might have been on. And it's identified really by the leaves here, which are very like the two maples that we looked at because it's part of the same family, but also the seeds, which we call helicopters. And as a kid, you might have watched them, or spinning jennies, you might have seen them coming to the ground. That's a sycamore tree. So the sycamore can live up to 400 years-ish, and it can get to 35 meters tall. It's not native, but it's been here for hundreds of years. So like we say, it's very, very familiar to us. The wood is used for more carving than furniture, and interestingly was used to make Welsh love spoons because it doesn't stain food. And then the last stop, this is right in front of the car park at the end of the walk. And there's a beautiful selection of different trees on this photograph. But the one I wanted to look at is the one on the very far left. Blooms on it that are white. And that is the horse chestnut tree. So again, that's not native to this country. It's native to the Balkans and was introduced here in the 16th century. But again, really common now for us to see horse chestnut trees. We will all be familiar with it probably as the conker tree. So again, when you were younger, you might have collected conkers, and that would have come from a horse chestnut tree. Over the full season, it changes dramatically. So you get these blooms on it that you can see on there that are really quite tall and are really beautiful to look at. So if you do get a chance to stop and look at some of those, I would do so before they start to die. And the leaves, really distinctive. So they've got 5 separate lobes on the leaf, and they're sort of long and serrated edges and pointed at the end. So we've gone there on a 1-mile walk through a really built up town centre. And what I wanted to show you now is the spotter sheet that you can create from that short walk, well, the different types of trees that we've seen on the way. So we've gone from the silver birch and the London plane at the university to the white beam at the flats, 2 types of maple near the Mecco Bingo Hall, the rowan tree at Morrison's and the elder at the NCP car park, the lime trees at the marketplace, the sycamore at the building site and the horse chestnut at the church. So I did find my 10 trees, managed to do it successfully. And looking at the different shapes and textures, I'm hoping that you can see it would be possible to identify that these were all different trees, even with a minimal amount of knowledge, and you could go away and maybe look into it further when you got home. So on that walk, what did focusing do in terms of well-being? So I switched my attention from the shops, the adverts, the buildings, the people, all the other distractions that are purposefully put in a town centre to make us look. And I switched focus instead to anything that was green or any trees that I found. And I found that that changed how I saw that route that I've done hundreds of times in my life for work and for college when I used to work in the town centre. And I saw that route in a completely different way. I connected with the green in that environment and I saw how much variety there was even in that tiny space. I noticed so much stuff, and it wasn't just the trees. It made me look at the ground and at the flowers in the cracks in the pavement, the flowers that were growing around the bottom of the street trees, the hedgerows. And it made me, I felt wonder at the amount of species around me that I'd pretty much, you know, it'd just been there, but I hadn't really connected with it. It made me see everything slightly differently. And I enjoyed that walk so much more than I would say quite a lot of the walks I'd done around Bolton previously when I've been rushing to get a coffee or to get to a meeting. By the end of that walk, I was like, wow, that's really fascinating. So I saw it in a completely new light. So I hope that gives you some insight into how you can use what's immediately around you to try to shift away from thinking about day-to-day worries to focus on something totally different, even if it's just for 20 minutes, and see if you can get something out of that. Another thing that we can do is to try to engage all of our senses. And this is a common technique that we use when working with worry and anxiety, and it's a grounding technique, and it's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what we're thinking about in that technique is making your brain, again, focusing on different things, but we're doing it in a structured order, and each step you're engaging a different sense. You can do this exercise absolutely anywhere. Do you see the photograph in the background of this slide is the car park at the end of my walk? So you can see it's probably not somewhere that you'd think I can go and do a nature connection exercise here. It doesn't look that inviting in terms of nature connection, but this is where I started this exercise. So starting from 5, the thing to start with is 5 things that you can see. So if you look at that verge on the previous slide where there was the billboard with nothing on it that looked a bit tatty, that verge there at the moment is full of wildflowers. So I picked out 5 flowers that I found on that verge, and these pictures are genuinely from that verge. So we've got buttercups, we've got bluebells, we've got carpet bugle, we've got wild poppies. There was all kinds going on in there, but just taking the time to stop, to walk around that corner and to see how many little flowers I could find is absolutely amazing. And I'm sure if I can find it there, then we can find it in most places. Then move on to things that you can touch, 4 things that you can touch. And I'm suggesting here that we think about tree bark. There's such variety in tree bark. So not just the way that it looks, but the way that it feels. So we've got smooth barks. We've got barks that have got lots of crinkles in them. We've got barks that are covered in moss, which feels soft and sometimes damp and squishy. We've got lichens. We've got things like galls and other textures that you might find on the bark. Some bark peels off as the tree grows. So all of the pictures you can see there of tree bark, I found on that walk. And you can get into a whole different world of trying to think about what all the different moss species are, which I have done. And that in itself is fascinating, but just that texture, what you can feel when you put your hand on the bark, if you can find 4 different textures on one of your walks. And then 3 things you can hear. So this is where you can bring in slightly different things. You can focus on the sound of trees. So some tree species are they make a much more audible sound. I'm thinking of the birch trees with the wind through them, and aspen, which are well known for that kind of rustly noise. But on a windy day, any tree is going to make a sound that you can stop and try and listen to. Birds, wherever you are, it doesn't matter where you are. If there's any kind of tree, hedgerow, shrubbery, anything like that, you're likely to be able to hear birds. You can hear blackbirds rustling on the ground. They tend to run along looking for things, and you can hear them in the undergrowth. Even seagulls, which we all are familiar with the sound of seagulls, pigeons. And if you're up in the morning and you're walking somewhere early on, and it's this time of year, the dawn chorus, and something I would suggest that you try and do if you're able to, is to maybe just stop and listen to the dawn chorus and do an exercise in how many different bird songs can you pick out of that all together. And that in itself is a way to try and focus your mind, is to think, okay, can I count how many different songs there are within this? And it will change every day. So that's an exercise you can try quite often during the spring months. If it's raining, you can hear the sound of the rain on the leaves and in puddles. Many towns and urban spaces have got canals or rivers near them, and you can go and listen to the sound of that. And of course, if you're in a park, you can hear dogs quite often barking, and different species of dog barking and people talking. So all of the things that you can hear then, if you try to pick out 3 on your walk that are different. And then things that you can smell. So this might involve getting a bit more up close and personal with some of the species that we've been looking at. So in the photo there near the church, there's a lilac tree there, which is absolutely stunning. And they have got a gorgeous smell. Bluebells, different flowers that have been planted in parks this time of year, cherry trees, all kinds of stuff. Or even if you're somewhere where there's pine trees, they've got a really lovely distinctive smell. So stop and have a think of 2 things that you can smell. The last one thing you can taste. I'm going to say maybe you need to pre-plan this a little bit, because we're not going to taste things that we find on our walk. But what it might be really lovely to do is to take some fruit or berries or something that has come from a tree or a bush and try and connect that with your walk in some way. So if you've got a gorgeous cherry blossom tree on your walk, take some cherries and try to think about the connection between that taste and that tree. So what have we done with that technique? We've spent time focusing on what's around us. So sort of connecting with that immediate environment. And we've noticed the green around us. We've noticed the different species, the variety we've got, stuff we didn't really focus on before. With the second technique, we've engaged our senses with everything that's around us, all of our senses individually. But what do we do about a longer term connection? Because we know that one of the ways to well-being is a longer term connection with places and people. So how do we convert what we've done in those two short exercises to something more long term? And an easy way to do this is to keep repeating that exercise, to give yourself a sense of how your environment is changing through the seasons. So we're in spring now. We all know that that's a brilliant time of year. We love that. We can see all the blooms, we can see the new life, but we know that that changes, and then becomes autumn, and then there comes winter. And you'll see the same place very differently through those seasons. So to give you an idea of how that might affect trees, I've chosen one of our time-lapse videos. The Woodland Trust has done a series of these with different tree species, but I love the horse chestnut, so I've picked that. So I'm hoping that you can see this when I press play, and it'll show you a year in the life of a horse chestnut tree. And the final thing, before we hand over to Becky, is once you've started to do this, and you might have found an interest in doing this and maybe charting what you see, there's different ways to connect with that. So you can sign up to iNaturalist, where you can record the things that you find and connect with other people who are interested in that. You can participate in Nature's Calendar through the Woodland Trust, or you could find something local to you, like the Natural History Museum there, starting a new urban nature movement, which relies on citizen science, or connect with Students for Trees and what they're doing. And through doing that, you could meet other people who share your interests. Have a walk with people in a place that you've found, go to a park together, share with people what you've learned, join a volunteer group, plant new trees. I can't emphasize enough how rewarding it is to plant some new trees, because then you get to see this whole process from the start and you can watch that grow. And it's absolutely amazing. So that's all from me on the different techniques, and I'm hoping that you found something useful there. I can see there's some questions popped up, but I can't read them right now, so we'll leave that until afterwards. But if we want to move over to Becky's talk next, in which she'll show you a different way that you can connect with some of the things we've been looking at.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Oh my goodness, I was like furiously writing notes down for tips there. Absolute feast of ideas. Thank you so much, Vicky. Hi everyone. So I'm sure you're feeling very loaded up with ideas, and you're about to have another dose of some more. So I'm Becky. I'm an artist, or art ecologist, as I'm kind of playing with at the moment, thinking about how we can use art practice to illuminate the animacy of the ecology around us. And this might also mean spotlighting ecology in places that we don't normally expect, or even enlivening things that we would usually consider dead, inert, or otherwise inanimate. I have an MA Art in science, and I'm doing another master's in MA Art and Ecology at Goldsmiths. So for those of you tuned in who are currently going through exam or assessment stress, I'm definitely with you and definitely practicing some of these things I'll be preaching. And similar to Vicky and Hazel, as part of my practice, I host a range of different workshops or workshops around reconnection and kind of really getting back to our ecological self. And so to touch on some of the themes that have been mentioned today, so when we're busy or stressed, sometimes the last thing we feel like we have time for is connecting with ecology, especially taking a walk. But I'm going to briefly argue the case for making that time, but also offer some other ways to connect with ecology or nature in ways that we might not really think of. And I guess for me personally, to echo some of the things that Vicky was saying, I find connecting with nature so important for grounding myself and kind of really recalibrating what's really important. Not to say that what we're doing or what we're worrying about isn't significant, but sometimes when you're looking at that big picture, it can reduce the pressure that we put on ourselves. And I also find a lot of comfort and reassurance in the seasons, especially if things are feeling a bit out of control or a bit unstable, unpredictable, actually just tuning into kind of the replenishing rhythms of winter, kind of the readiness for spring, summer, or kind of wherever we're at now, I think we can call it summer, really characterizes like fizz of partnerships. So yeah, many of the events that I do and workshops that I host are very much around tuning into those rhythms. So very briefly then, I'll just run through some methods. Let's share this screen. Can you see like a plain pale green background? Yep, good. Oh, it's always a bit disturbing when you kind of see it there. Okay, fabulous. So first up, the pale green background. So we're going to kind of broaden our understanding of what nature connection could mean, kind of taking it a little bit further than trees. So very briefly then, I'll try and be clever with double screen. Let's go. Yes. So number one, nature connection really starts with our own bodies. This is kind of the first ground. So if you really can't go anywhere or move anywhere, or there's nothing around you, perhaps you're in a white library cubicle, actually the first thing we can do is connect with our own bodies. So we are, of course, a soft edge ecology, a multiplicity of many different organisms, and we are in tune, potentially less than we used to be, with our ecology, and actually just breathing or doing some breathing exercise can be a wonderful way just to bring us back to ourselves. And I really love this quote from a book called The Environment Is Us by Harold Frome, where he talks about the fact that if we could put a microscope and do a time-lapse video inside the human body, we would just see ourselves as a mini environment or ecology with water and air and food and microbes dancing around. So yeah, the very first thing, if you can do nothing else, is just tune in to your own body with some breathing exercises or whatever meditation you use, and there's many resources out there. And then the next step, which is one of my favorites, is our bellies. And Vicky just mentioned this or touched on this previously. So another way that we can connect with ecology when we need to is through eating and ingestion. So obviously the first thing, a great way is seasonal plants. So again, in the interest of tuning into rhythms, the seasons actually offer what we need at that time. So in springtime, you get these really nourishing, cleansing, dark greens that kind of replenish you after the paucity of winter. In the autumn time, which I know is a little bit far off, we get those kind of high density, starchy vegetables to fuel us up through the cooler days. So actually the seasonal plants are a great menu of things to go to refuel you at that time. And of course, herbal tea being an absolute classic. I sometimes refer to it as a spa in a cup. So for me, when I really need to concentrate, things like rosemary, mint, thyme, the aromatics are really great for concentration. So even if you don't particularly like the taste of it, just inhaling those wonderful aromas really might help your mind to set right, and of course if you ingest it, it's even better. And of course there are lots of resources out there, lots of wonderful herbalists, probably some people tuning in already, where you can find out what might work for you at this time. And then next up, plants at home. So I know definitely through the pandemic, there was a upswing of people planting pots and seeds on their windowsills, etc. So at this time, if you don't already, definitely encourage you to treat yourself to a plant for your desk or your windowsill, and treat it as a bit of a companion to accompany you. If it's flowering, it will add some colour and joy. It needs watering, which reminds you to take stock and tend to it. So you have to get up from your desk. So potted plants are obviously better for all, but the other day I just treated myself to a bunch of flowers. Why don't we do that enough just to have that bloom and that scent on my desk? So yeah, that's the next step. The next one is a little bit more abstract and it requires a bit of imagination. So I call this a plant inventory, and sometimes I open up my nature reconnection sessions with this, where we basically write a list of every touch point we've had with plants in a day. And this starts from the moment you wake up and you've had cotton on your pillowcase, maybe you're turning to your side table, which is made of wood, maybe using your face wash, which has different botanicals in it, then you're making your toast, which comes from wheat. So you really have to take your imagination for a walk and really track back those chains of connection. So yeah, that one requires a bit of brain power, but if you really don't have any plants to hand or any vegetables in your pantry, you can just kind of do that imaginative, meditative activity. So next up is atmospheres. So again, Vicky touched on that as well. So again, even if you live in quite an urban area and there aren't many green spaces around you, actually just stepping out your door, or if you have a balcony, or stepping out of your office out into the fresh air, is already going to have a swathe of benefits. So like I said, you'll be in fresh air, you'll have a change in temperature, the feeling of light on your face. Sometimes a bit of light rain is nice, especially on those really warm, close summer days. Actually, it can be quite refreshing to have a spritz of rain on your face. And sometimes just a walk around the block is more than enough. And I think we could take Vicky's wonderful arts of noticing activities, and just a few loops around the block might be enough just to give you a quick replenish and revive. And of course, that vitamin D and daylight on your face has many benefits. Cloud gazing is a great way just to tune out just for a moment. The shade of the street tree, if you're like me, giving barks, high fives as you go along, making the people behind you a little bit perturbed. I also, if there's a pavement and a grass, I'm one of those weird people, it doesn't matter who I'm walking with, I'm always walking on the grass. It just feels like it cushions me a bit more. So my walking party might be on the pavement and I'll be kind of a metre or so away from them on the grass. And these sound like really mundane things that wouldn't make a difference, but honestly they're these little shifts that will just hopefully go some way to setting your body right. And then next up, of course, gardens and parks. So if you're really lucky, you might have your own garden, and of course that needs no explanation or guidance. And being in London, we're really lucky. You can just turn around the corner and there's always a park or a community square. And yeah, even if you can only make a short walk, or sometimes I feel like I'm really too slammed to even go for a walk, and I do a little bit of a cheat. And I might take a podcast with me, so I kind of trick myself into thinking that I'm still being productive or still fueling myself with the study content. Of course, if you don't do that, that's even better, but we are very realistic and understand that sometimes you have to try and balance both worlds. So yeah, even if you take your podcast or recorded lecture with you on a walk to a local park and get a quick injection, that helps also. Next, a good old immersion. Sometimes you really need to just get away from your desk, and obviously everybody's different and studies differently, but for me, when I'm blocked, and when I mean blocked, I'm reading the word "the" and thinking, is this even a word? THE, does that even make sense? When you get to that stage where that doesn't even seem like a real word, it's probably time to invest in popping on the bus and going somewhere. The other day, it was the day before a big hand in. I had a big piece of writing to do. I just couldn't get the thing down to the word count. So I took a 45-minute bus to one of my favourite green spots and just let that flood of green take over. It was kind of close to golden hour near sunset. I really took in those VOCs and the oxygen from the trees, dappled light, feet on the soil. I just gave myself what I needed, and I felt like a new woman when I returned. So sometimes it's knowing when you're blocked, actually the best thing you could do is really recharge your batteries. And finally, I've put digital. It's my least favorite. I'm not a particular fan of virtual walks and screen-based experiences because I have access to other opportunities, but of course that might work for others. But I'm kind of okay with music as a digital conduit. So bearing in mind most of the music we listen to is digitally through our ears and not at live gigs, as much as I would love it to be. Music can actually be really helpful. So for me, during stressful assignment times, rain for sleep is a go-to, and I'm sure many people have put on thunderstorms to fall asleep. And actually woodland for studying. When I have to write, I can't have any dialogue, but I like to have a bit of background noise. And my favorite go-to is tree.fm, where you can tune into different trees from around the world, forests from around the world, and yeah, vicariously get an injection of nature. So that was a very quick download of some tips of perhaps other ways that you can connect to ecology and nature moments, just to add to Vicky's very comprehensive toolkit as well. So I will stop there because I know time is running away, but I hope that was useful.
Thank you both for brilliant talks. I was personally writing down lots of things then, so I hope everyone else was too. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A we've probably got time to cover. So the first question is from Sarah, and she asks if there are any statistics on how successful green social prescribing has been. I wonder if Vicky wants to take that one.
Yeah, I would say that there are individual project statistics. So for example, our project evaluated every single walk, and we did that using standard NHS mood questionnaires so that we could compare it to, if we did it again, we could compare it to the same kind of parameters that the NHS was using. And we found through that 100% of participants felt less stressed afterwards. And I don't think you can get better than that. But thinking on a more national level, the NHS has been looking at green social prescribing for years, and they've got a website that is dedicated to that. And it might be worth having a look at that and seeing if they've got any updated studies on where they're at with it and what they've found sort of across the country. And that might be a bit more insightful than just looking at my small study, I think.
Thanks, Vicky. A question that came in through the chat box from Serene, I think it was asking for a bit more clarification on the Seek app that you mentioned, Vicky.
Oh, so Seek is linked to iNaturalist, and you just look for it for, just search for Seek and it'll come up. The difference is that it's not verified by other people. So as you use iNaturalist and iRecord, other people will verify your sighting so that you're absolutely certain you've got the right ID. Seek is more of a, you just out on a walk and you just want to know kind of thing, and it will give you an answer straight away. I would say most of the time you can trust it. Sometimes it's not very good with things like fungi where there's a bit more technical knowledge required. But for stuff like leaves on trees, I would say it's perfectly fine if you're on a walk and you just want to know what kind of tree that is. And it's dead easy and it's free. So it's worth using that. If you want to get a bit more involved in tree ID or plant ID, you could move to iNaturalist or iRecord.
Great, thank you. Max asks if there's any more information you can share, Vicky, about the project that you outlined.
The Smithills project. So there is a Facebook page where you can follow everything that's happening on that project. That's called Woodland Trust Smithills Estate. or you can find it on the Woodland Trust website. It is still ongoing now with loads of exciting stuff still happening there. But the best place to find out what's happening immediately is on that site's Facebook page.
Brilliant. And a final question from Paula: does gender affect how one engages with nature and trees?
Becky, I'm going to bring you in on this one as well. I would say that is a really interesting question. And from my perspective, no, that people describe their experience the same way to me regardless. But I wonder if you've experienced anything different, Becky.
I have not seen any research, and I'd be absolutely speculating if I were to share anything there. But I mean, from my my experience hosting nature connection events and walks, there really has not been a marked difference. I think, yeah, I would echo you, Vicky. But yeah, I would not have any research to share, so no. I'm afraid I can't. Yeah, I wouldn't want to speculate on that.
I think it's an interesting question, and I wonder if there's a question around whether there's a difference in how people make that step to engage in, rather than their experience of it. I don't know, but again, I'd be interested to see if there was any research on that.
I was actually talking about this question with my colleagues the other day, and again, they weren't aware of any papers that explicitly found a difference between how genders determine whether you connect with nature or anything. But they did comment on whether safety affects how much you engage with the natural environment, and I think there maybe would be some gendered elements to safety in some spaces.
You're right, Hazel, that is something that participants have mentioned, is feeling safe to go and do that outside of a group on your own as a woman, or anyone really, the feeling going into the woods in the dark maybe, or at night. So yeah, there is an element of safety around it, definitely.
I'm just checking that we've not got any more questions. Oh, and Paula adds something about vocabulary that we use as well. Okay, so we've got another comment from Shireen, and something about isolated cultures such as BAME communities, LGBTQ. Okay, so adding to this debate about whether different people are able to experience and engage with nature, are there certain members of society that feel less able to?
I think that's true, and I think looking at our panel, it's kind of reflected as well that people who end up in conservation, there's work to do on that. And I think part of the engagement strategy we had at Smithills was to go and speak to different communities, people who might have language barriers or might have other reasons why they didn't automatically come and find that site, and see what we could do to enable that to happen, rather than just expecting it to happen. Because it's not that people don't want to engage, it's that there's reasons that they can't. So, and also having an environment where it's very welcoming, and that's the whole focus of it, is that we are welcoming and everyone is welcome. And it's not that it's a place for certain people, green spaces. Like, I think we need to challenge that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're out of time, so thank you so much to Vicky and Becky for their fantastic presentations. And if you've got any more questions, you should be able to reach us via the Urban Tree Festival website, and hopefully they can pass any questions on to whoever you've got a question for. Sarah, have you got anything you'd like to add about the rest of the festival before we finish?
Echoing the thanks to all of our fantastic panelists for their wonderful presentations, and to Hazel for chairing, and thank you to all of our participants for joining the session today. Please do check out the festival programme for other webinars happening throughout the week, and consider making a donation. The festival is run completely by volunteers, but most of all, enjoy the rest of the festival, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. That's a real pleasure. Take care,
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.